Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wa sallam ala Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. This morning we embark upon yet again a new endeavor as we enter into a study of the book entitled Kitabun Nikah, the book entitled the Book of Marriage. Now, Kitabun Nikah, the book of marriage, it is within, of course, a larger work. The larger work that it is within is a work that is entitled Minhaj al-Salikin wa Tawdih al-Fiqh fi deen, the way of the traveler, clarifying fiqh in the deen, clarifying law within the religion. And this work, it is primarily a work of fiqh. It is primarily a work of law. And this work has been authored by the esteemed scholar, Sheikh, the luminary, Abdurrahman ibn Nasr al-Sa'di, or as his family states their name, al-Sa'di. May Allah be exalted, bestow expansive mercy upon his soul, as he passes in the year 1376 after the Hijrah, which brings us right around to about 1956 or 1957 CE, Common Era. And when we speak to this topic, Kitabun Nikah, the book of marriage, it will kind of help us to understand this study if we understand something a bit broader first. And that is how law books are set up, how books of fiqh are set up. There are two main sections to fiqh. There are two main sections to fiqh, to law, or if you like, two categorizations. Now, there are other ways we can look at this and say that there are three or four different sections, but for our discussion, we're going to say there are two. The first half of fiqh is Kitabul Ibadat, the book of worship. The second half of fiqh is Kitabul Mu'amalat, the book of social interaction. So the book of worship, this focuses on primarily the last four pillars of the five pillars of Islam. So you're going to go through Salah and its prerequisites like purification and water and that type of thing. You're going to go through Salah, you're going to go through Zakah, you're going to go through fasting, you're going to go through Hajj, this type of a thing. That's the book of worship. That's the first half of fiqh. The second half of fiqh is going to deal with what is called mu'amalat, social interactions, how we're interacting with one another, whether that be in a positive interaction, in a negative interaction, in an easy interaction, in a hard interaction, a once in a lifetime interaction, or a daily interaction. How do we look at all these things, and what is the hukm of Allah upon these things? What is the verdict of Allah upon these things? So in the book of social interaction, this is where you're going to come into, for example, the laws as it relates to commerce law, business transactions, whether you're buying and selling a simple item at a store, or you have a business that you have up and running, right? Either way, issues of clothing, issues of eating, laws as it relates to war, laws as it relates to slavery, laws as it relates to marriage. All these things are social interactions that we have. In our discussion, because marriage is a social interaction, what is included inside of this discussion is, for example, if there's a way for us to enter into a marital contract, there must also be a way for us to exit from a marital contract as well. Right? These are still social interactions. We have laws for that. What are these things? What's the proper way to do it in a fashion that is deemed correct and a fashion that is pleasing to Allah? What is obligatory? What is wajib in this discussion? What is mustahab? What is optimal? What is mubah? What's neutral? What is makruh? What is disliked by Allah? What is discouraged? What is mahdhur? Or as we commonly say, haram. What is illegal or what is unlawful when we enter into these discussions? Marriage, divorce, in the different types of divorces that we have, children result as as a product of marriage, if you want to think about it that way, right? Now we may enter into custody laws and things of that nature, right? All of this is in social interaction, all of it, okay? So, firstly, it is common in the books of fiqh, it is common in the books of law for the book of marriage to be near Kitabul Bay', to be near the book of commerce law or commercial law, right? Business transactions. And the reason why you're going to find the book of marriage near that, either right before it or right after it, in our work it comes directly after it, because when you are entering into a marriage, you are entering into a transaction. You're entering into a transaction. You're entering into a contract. You're entering into an agreement. There are expectations. There are roles. There are rights. There is an exchange that is there. So the idea is that we understand how how commerce law works first and generally before we start speaking about particular types of transactions, right? And marriage is a particular type of transaction, okay? And we're stating this from the standpoint of law. Of course, we are not excluding from this love and mercy and affection and longevity and all the things that it entails. But we're speaking about it from the standpoint of placing a framework around it so that we have guidelines to abide by to assist us in having a healthy, long-lasting marriage. So far, so good. Okay. Kitabun Nikah, the book of marriage. Our first discussion here is actually concerning the word nikah itself, the word marriage itself. How would we define the term nikah or the term marriage in Islam? How would you define that? And you got to have something, because I'm looking at a few of y'all, and a few of y'all are married or have been married, so y'all got to have something. Or unless y'all just doing stuff, y'all know what y'all doing.
It's a contract.
It's a contract. Good. Keep going. What is marriage to you? What you doing right now? What do you think?
Building on the marriage.
Building on the marriage. Yes? You okay? Just the thought of marriage shook you up, huh? You can't even get it out. A mutual agreement between two people that come together for the sake of Allah. Uh-huh. Okay. And you want me to fill in the rest? No problem. All right. Before we offer a definition, and I'm going to say it this way because you actually reminded me of something when you stated that it's done for the sake of Allah, and it can and it should be done for the sake of Allah. But we have a common misnomer here in the West as it relates to the understanding of marriage in Islam. It's going to come out when we ask this question. Is marriage an act of worship as an independent entity? Marriage in and of itself. Marriage as an independent entity. We're not adding other factors into it. We're not taking other factors out of it. It itself, right, as an independent entity, as an independent construct, is it an act of worship?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I would say yes, but you're safeguarding your private parts.
Yes, because you're safeguarding your private parts.
And I would say no, because marriage is supposed to expand the ummah.
And no, because you're supposed to expand the ummah. Huh? Our sister says? You say yes, it is. Okay. And our fellow participants online, at least from those that we can see, we can't see all of you online. We know you're here, but the ones that I can see here, feel free to chime in as well. So, guess what? The answer is no. Go ahead.
So isn't there a hadith that says that marriage is half of...
Okay, isn't there a hadith that says marriage is half of your deen? Yes, we can discuss that too. Okay, we'll discuss these 2 points, and then we'll enter into the definition of nikah, the definition of marriage. Firstly, the book of marriage has been placed in which section of fiqh? The book of worship or the book of social interaction? The book of social interaction, right? Which means that scholarship historically to present that are writing our books of law have consistently placed marriage under social interaction and not under worship. Okay? Eat. You guys eat, right? You do that? Is eating an act of worship?
Yeah.
Say, yeah. You said, good?
Okay.
I
I digress for one second.
Go ahead.
We have been commanded to get married for the sake of Allah.
We've been commanded to get married.
We have been commanded to nurture ourselves for acts of ibadah, for worship. I mean, for fighting, we have to sustain ourselves. So therefore, eating is required.
Okay, eating is required. Does a requirement make it an act of worship? Right. So if we're saying that it's an act of worship, it can also mean that every time you eat, you have to be fulfilling certain things in order for your eating to be offered as an act of worship to Allah. What are those things? Huh? Let's look at it a little bit differently. Salah. Is salah an act of worship? You say yes. Okay. When you pray, you can pray however you want to pray?
No.
No? How you pray?
Pray according to what
You pray according to the way the Prophet ﷺ prayed.
Right.
Pay zakat. You pay zakat however you feel like? It's a little more particular, right? Fasting, right? Do you do intermittent fasting and call that your fasting for Ramadan? No. Okay. Hajj, go down North Carolina and make Hajj? Like they say some of the Cherokee Native Americans who embrace Islam used to do? Can you do that? Go down North Carolina and make Hajj? No. Okay. Can you marry who you want to marry?
Yeah. No.
Yes, no?
No.
No? Okay. So there's a specific person you have to marry. Okay, it's a specific person we have to marry, and we all have to marry that specific person?
Specific type person. Type.
Okay, type, okay. Is there a specific person to marry? No. Okay. Can't marry your brothers and sisters. I'm not saying they're not guidelines. I'm not saying that. I want us to make the distinction between worship and not worship. Is this something worldly, or is it something hereaftery? Is it worldly, or is it worship?
It's more worldly. But
It's more worldly.
it could be both, but it's more worldly.
It could be both. So there's a distinction. Because again, if you're going to say it's an act of worship, right? You're going to say it's an act of worship, right? Do we as Muslims acknowledge marriages of non-Muslims?
Yes.
How? If it's worship. If two Christians get married in accordance with their faith tradition and their faith practice, do we as Muslims acknowledge them as being married?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Evidence, lakum dinukum waliya deen. To us be your religion, to you be your religion, to me be my religion, right? We acknowledge that we have religious tolerance. We're going to acknowledge them as actually being married, even though they didn't follow any of the guidelines of Islam in getting married. Likewise, anyone who is of Jewish faith or Zoroastrian or could be a Satanist, we would still acknowledge them as being married. How can they be married if it's an act of worship, and an act of worship has to be done in alignment in alignment with exactly what our Lord has laid out for us? And they're not doing that. The Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, were there a time that the Sahaba were non-Muslims? Most of them. Yes. When the adult Sahaba are embracing Islam, are most of them married? Yes, they are. What text do we have of any one of them remarrying when they embrace Islam? Or the Prophet ﷺ ordering them to remarry because they became Muslim now? Give me one. Because they got married in accordance with the tenets of their faith practice at the time. Islam acknowledges that. You don't need to remarry because it is worldly. It's not worship. This doesn't mean that you cannot enter other factors into it that can change it into an act of worship. Eating, it's a worldly function. Eating, drinking, walking, sleeping, these are worldly functions. By way of adjusting your intention, it can become worship for you, but it itself as an independent entity is not an act of worship. Right? For the Muslim, we hope to make it into an act of worship, but in and of itself as an independent construct is not. So far so good? Or we got some pushback? So far so good? The origin with acts of worship is that it is haram to worship Allah unless we have a specific evidence to worship Allah that way. With worldly matters, the origin is that everything is halal, everything is lawful, unless we have a specific evidence to say that we can't. Right? Which is why our brother here was saying, well, no, there's certain types of people that we look to marry, because there's certain types of people certain types of people we can't marry. That's still a description of something that's worldly. Everything is permissible unless we have a specific text to say we can't do a specific thing. Outside of that specific thing, marry who you want. There's no restrictions, right? Unless we have an evidence that restricts us, no restriction goes back to being permissible. So when it comes to acts of worship, the question is, what is the evidence that I can do this? When it comes to worldly matters, the question is, what is the evidence that I cannot do this? Sometimes we invert that, right? And we shouldn't invert it, right? Somebody's worshiping Allah in a particular way that perhaps that they shouldn't be. You mention something to them. What's your proof that I can't worship Allah this way? No. What's your proof that you can worship Allah that way? Right? And then when it's time to do something worldly, Aqil, is it permissible? Can I do this? Wrong question. Is there any evidence that I can't do this? And if there's no evidence that you can't, have at it, whatever that is. Does that make sense? Okay. And there is always more that our Lord makes allowable for us than he makes disallowable for us. Always. Right? So we drink. We drink. You can drink water. You can drink cucumbered water. You can drink any type of flavored water you want. You can drink water from a spring if you want to. You can drink water from a flowing river if you want to. Drink water at the faucet if you want to. No restriction, right? Different types of water, no problem, right? You can drink water that's alkaline if you want to. You can drink water that's distilled if you want to. Milk. You can drink milk from a cow. You can drink milk from a sheep, a goat. You can drink milk from a camel. Milk. Different types of milk. Make your milk chocolate if you want. Make it strawberry if you want. It's milk, right? Freeze it up, put some other stuff in there, turn it into ice cream. It's milk. No problem, right? You drink it. Milkshake, drink it, no problem, right? It's milk. Juice, grape juice, apple juice, pineapple juice for some of y'all, tomato juice for y'all V8 people, right? Whatever the juice, no problem. Different, no problem. Tea, black tea, white tea, green tea, whatever. It's open. But this one type of drink though, this drink that intoxicates, don't drink that one drink. Don't drink what intoxicates you. But all this over here, drink as much as you want, no restriction. Right? It's always set up that way. It's always set up that way, right? So that we don't have the idea that our Sharia, that our legislation is somehow restrictive or discipline-based or oppressive or the things that we, right? That it's, militarized or the different things that people say. No, it's not like that. It's not like that. Is there a space and a time for certain things? Yeah, but that's not really what it is, right? Not in the whole of it. Okay. So if that makes sense, we then have to come to the discussion that our brother mentioned. He's mentioning the hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that marriage is half of your deen and you have taqwa of Allah for the other half, right? As to implicate that marriage is worship. Firstly, before we explain what that hadith means, we have to ask, what does the term deen mean if we're going to utilize the term deen to prove that marriage is an act of worship? We translate deen as, we say religion. We say that way of life, right? What's deen? How do you define that? You want to look at your notes? It's in there, it's in there. الشرع الإلهي المتلقى عن طريق الوحي. Divine legislation transmitted by route of revelation. Right? So it is, again, divine legislation transmitted by route of revelation. That's what deen is. So in its origin, by definition, deen is shara. Deen is law. It's law. And our law, does it encompass worship? Yes. But it also encompasses that which is beyond worship as well. When we talk about Sharia, people say like Sharia law and things like that. Yeah, there are laws there, yes. But it also includes Aqidah, it includes our theology and spirituality, it includes worship, right? It does include laws, it includes our social interactions, it includes all of these things, right? So that by itself doesn't necessarily mean worship, right? But as for what the hadith itself means, we have another hadith, because we understand this hadith by levying it against another. We have another hadith that explains to us that the majority reason why humanity will go to hell is two reasons, which are, we know that hadith, we know it, I know we know it. The tongue and the private parts. Tongue and the private parts, right? So if these two reasons are the majority reason why human beings will end up in Jahannam, end up in hell, from these two things, what does marriage solve? One. What's half of two? One. That's why it is said marriage is half of your deen, because it solves half of the two main problems why people go to hell. Does that make sense? And what remains after that is taqwa of Allah. So if you're able to control your mouth, control what you say, how you say it, who you say it to, right? The Prophet ﷺ says, "Man samata naja," whoever is silent will be successful, right? You would think we can just shut the trap. You would think, right? Okay, that's one thing, right? So if we can do that, we can protect ourselves from hell. If we speak in a way that is pleasing to Allah. In fact, we can earn ourselves the mercy of Allah, and by way of the mercy of Allah, paradise, by the way we speak and use our language and our tongues. Likewise with our private parts. Likewise with our private parts. So again, this hadith solves one of those two problems. This is why marriage is half of the deen. Okay? If that makes sense, now we can enter into the definition of nikah. Not yet. Yes, sir.
I have a question about what you said earlier. You said that we acknowledge the marriages of other religions, other peoples, things like that.
Yes.
So what about LGBT marriages?
Okay, good. So our brother wants to put us on the front lines of the battlefield, huh? Make me the sacrificial lamb. Pull you around the camera on this side, huh? So he said that we acknowledge the marriages of other faith traditions. So what about the LGBTQIA plus community, which is now the proper vernacular, the proper argot, as it were, right? So firstly, we would have to ask, which faith tradition do we have that has readily accepted that type of a marriage as a part of its faith tradition? We're not talking about whether it's the act is right or wrong or acceptable or the politics of it. That's a different discussion. What faith tradition historically has within the faith tradition itself that it acknowledges that type of marriage? It's not there. It's not there. Actually, no. I'm not an expert on Satanism in and of itself, because we're talking about not the act, marriage. We're talking about marriage, not the act, right? Now, the concept with well, maybe I shouldn't be going here, right? Some of us actually know these things. We're not speaking at random, right? So the concept with Satanism is it in its end. Yes, it is worship of Iblis, right? In its end, but they don't posture it that way. They don't posture it that way. The way that they posture it is that there isn't right and wrong. There's only cause and effect, right? And those that know, you know, I'm not making this up. This is I'm not telling you to read the material and be aware. I have to be aware of it. I'm not telling you to. It's cause and effect, okay? And if there is a cause that you put into place, then you accept the effect of that, okay? And you couple that with exploring natural desire of the human being, wherever natural desire may lead you, right? These are base concepts inside of their tenets. But again, you're not going to find, specifically, yet again, you're not going to find this there either. Does that make sense? So if there's no faith tradition that has that embedded within it from the standpoint of them marrying, then yet again, from the standpoint of faith tradition, there isn't a way in faith for us to see the marriage as valid in the sight of Allah. As valid in the sight of Allah. Okay? Again, we're not speaking about the issues of do, not do, laws in our country, politics. We're not talking about any of that. Those are different discussions that we have in their place, some of which we have had. Actually, when we were doing stories of the prophets, and we covered the story of Prophet Lut, we went into some of these details at that time and the views of Islam on how we are to interact with those that may have that particular persuasion, right? But to answer your question, okay. All right, now that the brother got us in trouble and all of that, nikah, from a linguistic standpoint, the term, when we say linguistic, we mean in the Arabic language. The term nikah The term, what we translate as marriage, the term nikah, from its meanings is indamma ba'dun ba'da, for two things to be joined, or two things to be coupled together, or some things to be coupled with other things. It's from the meanings of it in Arabic language. From the meanings of nikah is al-wat', right? Al-wat' or al-wat'u, which we would call intercourse. From the meanings of nikah is al-aqd, is a contract or a knot, because the term in Arabic we use for a contract means like to tie a knot, right? Which interestingly, we say the same thing in English. We say tying the knot, right? This is implicating contract, right? Contract. From the standpoint of our shara', from the standpoint of our legislation, the term nikah is defined as aqd tajweej. It is a marital contract or a spousal contract, right? A marital contract or a spousal contract. And we'll get into the details of exactly what is meant by this, but we often think when we hear the term aqd or contract as it relates to marriage, we think that means something physically written out that we have reviewed and we've signed and all of that, right? That's actually a prenuptial, right? The contract in Islam is, and we're going to come to its details, we'll just mention it briefly now, is something called ijab and qabul. There is a proposal and an acceptance. That's the contract. That's the contract. The ijab and the qabul, the proposal and the acceptance. When the wali or the wakil, when the guardian of the bride offers the bride to the groom, and he says to the groom, I so-and-so, and he states specifically who he is, and marry you to person, sister, fulana, bint fulan, right? I'm married to this specific person, because you have to be particular on who you're marrying the person to, not marrying them to anybody. Do you accept? And then that's the ijab, that's the proposal. And then the qabul, the acceptance, the groom says, qabilt, I accept, or something that means this. That's the contract. That's the agreement that occurs right there. That's what the marriage is. That's the marriage. The other parts of it are parts that we include in it, either due to the sunnah or due to culture. But when the actual marriage takes place is when that happens, what we just stated. That's the marriage. Okay? And however that is stated between those two parties, whether it's the words that I use or words that mean the words that I used, when that happens, that is the agreement. And what we are agreeing to is what the Sharia has bound upon us once we have made that agreement between a husband and a wife. So far, so good. All right, moving forward. The author states, and it is from the Sunnah of the Mursaleen. Marriage is from the Sunnah of the prophets. 124,000 prophets, 315 messengers. Marriage is from their Sunnah, all of them broadly. And even if we want to say, well, what about Isa alayhi salam? He didn't get married. He didn't get married yet. Read the rest of the hadith. Read what happens when he comes back, right? He gets married too. Okay? So generally speaking and broadly, marriage is from the Sunnah of the prophets. It's prophetic tradition for men and women to marry one another. The author states, and in the hadith, was that going to be your question? Uh-huh. And there is come in the hadith, Ya ma'shar al-shabab, O party of youth, min istata'a minkum al-ba'a fayatazawwaj. Whoever amongst you has the ability in ba'a, then you should marry. For certainly it is better for the lowering of your gaze, and it is more of a fortress for your private parts. And whoever does not have the ability, then it is upon him to fast. فَعَلَيْهِ بِالصَّوْمِ, then it is upon this person to fast. فَإِنَّهُ لَهُ وِجَاء, for this person it'll be a shield. Shield from what? From the desires of the person, right? Strengthen you in controlling and suppressing your desire. May not eliminate it, but you can get it under control. Muttafaqun alayhi. This hadith is agreed upon. Now let's review this. O party of youth, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is directing this to, encouraging youth to marry. Does that mean those that are a little bit older should not marry? No, doesn't mean that. It means that the expectation is that if you are already of a mature age, you're already married. Right? That's the understanding from this. If the youth are being encouraged to marry, the youth are the same people that eventually grow older. So we're meant to go through life married from the standpoint of istihbab, from the standpoint of it being optimal, from the standpoint of it being encouraged, from the standpoint of it being highly recommended, from the standpoint of it being, if we do so in accordance with the legislation of Allah, and that is the reason why we're doing it, to comply with the Sharia, we're rewarded by Allah. And if we don't do so, then we're not under threat of any punishment or deserving of any sin. Okay? So for most people, marriage is mustahab. That's the origin of marriage. That is mustahab. Is it possible you could be in a scenario where it becomes wajib for you to marry? Yes, where it's obligatory upon you to marry. You can be in that scenario. Hopefully we don't find ourselves in that scenario, but we can find ourselves in a scenario where it's obligatory upon us to marry. Can we find ourselves in a scenario where it is mubah, where it's just neutral to marry? It's not necessarily good or bad, it just is, yeah. Discouraged, makruh, yeah. Haram, are there scenarios where it is haram to marry? Yeah. Right? But the origin is mustahab, right? Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ is encouraging us to marry. This is an encouragement. It's not an obligation, it's encouragement. O party of youth, whoever amongst you has the ability and ba'ah to marry, then you should marry. Right? I believe it's pretty clear, right? And making it mustahab, making it optimal, right? As a hukum, as a verdict. So what is ba'ah? Whoever amongst you has the ability and ba'ah to marry, then this person should marry. It's not just marrying, just get married because you can get married. There is a technically it's a qaid, it's muqayyid. There's a restrictor here, and our restrictor is those that have the ability in ba'ah. Those are the people that should marry. What do we think ba'ah is? Whoever amongst you has the ability in ba'ah to marry, then this person should marry. What could that be? We know the word might be a new Arabic word, but use context clues. What do you think? Urge. Whoever amongst you has the urge to marry, then you should marry. Go ahead. Willing to marry. Someone else? All right, so we can broadly look at this in three ways. Meaning, if you want to look at it as a singularity, you can. If you look at it as a singularity, it means provision. Whoever amongst you has the ability and provision to marry, then you should marry. All right? At the singularity. But really that singularity is three. Provision here means three things. It means that you have the ability to provide for a woman to the extent that you can shelter her from what you shelter yourself. You can feed her from what you feed yourself. You can clothe her from what you clothe yourself. You have the ability to take care of a woman. Lead a woman, right? الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men are maintainers and protectors of women, right? Men are maintainers and protectors of women. You have the ability to maintain and protect her, right? You can provide for her in this type of a way. The second meaning is you have the ability to, and we have to speak direct. I don't know how direct we can speak. You have the ability, don't go anywhere, I'll adjust. You have the ability to satisfy the opposite gender in affection and intimacy. You have the ability to fulfill that person. Okay? We know what we're saying. Okay. So one, you provide for her materially. The second meaning of ba'a, you provide for her intimately. And the third meaning of ba'a is both. Both. Okay? And the third meaning, in Allah knows best, appears to be the most proper meaning. That you have the ability to provide for her materially and intimately. Whoever amongst you all, O group of youth, whoever amongst you all has the ability in ba'a to provide for a woman materially and intimately, then you should marry. This is the meaning of the hadith. Then you should marry. So far, so good. Okay. And of course, we support our youth and we encourage our youth to marry in any ways that we can support them if they are in a space where they are looking to or they are ready to marry. We should not ignore or downplay what that is, because all of us kind of know what we were going through when we were at that point, and some of us dealt with that in certain ways, and some of us dealt with that in other ways. Our children aren't different. Okay? So we should be conscious of that. Right? Don't think now because you are where you are and you're kind of living your life how it is. No. Think back, remember what that was, and now you may be in a position to do something for your children that your parents weren't able to do for you. You see? We have to not acknowledge its reality. It's not going anywhere. If you ignore it, then sometimes your children come back with presents. You see that? Yes. Mm-hmm. Our sister strikes a good point that we should be in a position to. Go ahead.
Because everybody may not be, but not so. I don't want to use the word should, but if we're willing to
and we're in the position to support our children in that way, then we should be conscious of that, and we should, right? And it doesn't always necessarily have to mean that we're like rich and wealthy. It doesn't have to mean that, right? But there are ways that we can work together as families or work together in our scenarios, and we as parents, we know we're making things easier for our children, more difficult for our children. We know what we're doing, right? So, and we know what we do when we kind of push our children away and then they have to go try to find their way on their own, right? We know. So this is the meaning of this particular hadith. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he states, and perhaps we should close with this, looking at the time. We're not quite aware how long we've been going, but we'll do a little bit more and we'll stop inshallah ta'ala. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he states, "Tunkahul mar'a li arba'in." A woman is married for 4. لمالها وحسبها وجمالها ودينها فاظفر بذات الدين تربت يمينك. أو تربت يمينك. متفق عليه. A woman is married for 4. For her wealth, societal stature, beauty, and her deen. So marry the one who possesses deen. Taribat yaminuk aw taribat yadak. That's the word is just in my head. May your right be dust covered. May your right hand be dust covered, or may your 2 hands be dust covered. This hadith is muttafaqun alayhi. It is agreed upon. We also we know this hadith. We've all heard it before, but a lot of us, the way we understand it, it's a little bit slanted. So we're going to attempt to kind of balance this out a little bit. A woman is married for 4 reasons. This means that the most consistent reason as to why people marry will be settled on these four. And why is it that it's the woman being spoken of? A woman is married for four, and it's not a man is married for four, when it means both the man and the woman and they're married to one another? Because for the man, the majority of what motivates a man to do what he does is a woman. Quite often, whether we tell you all or not, whether we act like it or not, most of the reason why many men do what they do, it is there's a woman that's the reason behind that. Whether that is an actual woman that exists, or whether it is a woman that exists inside of his mind, or whether it's a woman in the future that he wishes to exist, it's a woman that's a motivating factor there for most men, and not all, but a lot of what men do. This is why this is worded this way. Also, the first hadith that comes in the Arba'un of an-Nawawiyah, we know we're not in a hadith class. This is a fiqh class, but we'll mention it to make the point. What's the first hadith that comes in the 40 hadith of an-Nawawi? Hadith about the intentions. Good. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are premised upon their intentions, and everyone will have that which they have intended. Keep going. So, good. So whoever performs hijrah, whoever migrates for Allah and His Messenger, then he's migrated for Allah and His Messenger. Keep going. And whoever migrates in order to marry a woman, right? Okay. Or for some worldly matter, then his migration is for wherever he made it for, whatever his intention was, right? Out of all the examples that exist, and everything that there is an intention for what we do, why did they mention the marriage why did the Prophet ﷺ say that as an example? Same reason. Because the majority of what men do, the reason behind us doing it, it's a woman somewhere. Again, might be a woman in the past, might be a woman in the present, might be a woman in the future. She may exist, she might not exist, she might not exist yet. But in our minds, right? Okay. So, understanding this though, a woman is married for four reasons. This goes for men and women. That's really our point here. Okay? Now, what are the reasons? Wealth, societal stature, beauty, and deen. A lot of us carry the understanding of this hadith that we should look to marry a person for their deen and not look to the other three qualities. That's not what this hadith is saying. That's not the meaning. It's not the meaning. A lot of us what's the deen? Well, she got the deen, so okay. Alhamdulillah. Got the deen. We need a little bit more. Right? So the understanding is that deen should be the foundation. Spirituality, right? Religiosity should be the foundation of what she has. That should be there first, but not only. The meaning of the hadith is deen and beauty, affection, attraction. That's more of a reason to marry her. Deen, beauty, and societal stature. It's good standing in society. Even more of a reason. Deen, beauty, societal stature, and she got a couple dollars. Even more of a reason to marry. Right? That's what the hadith is saying. It's not saying only deen and neglect everything else. No, it's stating make the deen foundation and get as much of the other things as you're able to get as well. That's what the hadith is stating. And that's the meaning of it. So far, so good. All right. Societal stature, what is included inside of this, and we're going to discuss it as we move forward, inshallah, hopefully with some more detail. Societal stature here, it means compatibility. Its meaning is compatibility. That her societal stature is either congruent or it flushes with your societal stature. Compatibility. In whatever compatibility might mean. It may mean people, these two people they have a middle class lifestyle. They come from a middle class suburban lifestyle. So they're compatible in that way. It may be if one individual is from a middle class or upper middle class suburban lifestyle and someone else is from the hood, from the streets. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but we got to consider that, right? It may be educational levels. Educational levels may be different. Have to consider that. What is your upbringing? What's your background like? And is your background compatible with this person's background? What is your culture? Is your culture compatible with this person's culture? What is your subculture? Because we have cultures, we have subcultures. Is your subculture compatible with this person's subculture? All of this comes under hasab. All this comes under societal stature or compatibility. These are all things we're meant to be considering in a marriage. And when we think, oh, mashallah, she stands up and she prays tahajjud every night. But you go ahead and marry her. Go ahead. Right? Then you arguing every night. Seemingly about nothing. No, it's a compatibility issue. Because you didn't check the compatibility factor beforehand. Right? Do you understand that quite literally we have certain chemicals that go off in our brain in the early stages of meeting and interacting with someone that we like that makes us overlook shortcomings that we normally wouldn't overlook. So you got to look through that. You all googly eyed and all. Look past that. Because after the googly eyes and you get married and you settle, now real life is going to happen. Now we got to live together. Now, when you wake up in the morning for Fajr, your alarm clock go off and you turn your head over, that person going to be sitting right there, lying right there. You got to deal with that. Can you deal with that? Right? So this is what that means, right? Compatibility is a major factor here. Our last line, it is appropriate, as the author states, which really is stating what we just said in the shorter words. It is appropriate, yanbaghi, in fiqh, when a person is speaking from the standpoint of the field of fiqh, the field of law, and the person says yanbaghi, it is appropriate, that means mustahab, that means encouraged. When they say something like la yanbaghi, it is not appropriate or it's inappropriate, that means makruh. That means that it's discouraged or disliked by Allah, but there's no sin. He states, yanbaghi, it is appropriate to choose the one who possesses deen, the one who possesses religiosity. She's religious. He didn't stop there though. He said, and hasab, and she has societal stature. We now know what that means. And he states she is loving and fertile. She is loving and she is fertile. Okay? And hopefully we understand what that means. We need to speak about it more. We can do so next week. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله على محمد. Questions? Yes.
So is it with the understanding of compatibility and the understanding of a wali or wakil, is it, I guess, appropriate, or is it enough for a wali or wakil to say, based on, for instance, this person being Arab, the person that I'm a guardian of being Arab, and you're, for instance, African American, wouldn't work? So just based on you being Black or African American, I don't think it would be compatible at all, and just leaving it there. Would that be?
Would that be? Last word? Because you done got me in trouble enough. I want you to say the word. Go ahead. Would that be? Go ahead.
Is that, I guess, I don't know which word to say.
Oh, now he don't know a word to say. He know a word when I gotta say it. No. Okay, good. So I'm with you. So the question is asking, it is a very common scenario that we come across in the Americas, and even in other places around the world when we travel, we come across a scenario. Anyone that's been Muslim for a while or has traveled a little bit, you know what we're about to say. That it is not necessarily uncommon for peoples who are African American or African British, right? Afro Caribbean, right? Peoples that are black and Muslim, when they are looking to marry and they identify someone who may be of an ethnicity that is Muslim, but maybe they consider themselves to be Arab. Maybe they are from the Indian subcontinent. Maybe they're Eastern African, because that happens too. That's a thing, right? If you know, you know. And you will be told, no, you're not suitable, often very quickly and without any consideration, for no other reason than you are African American, or you're black, or you're Afro Caribbean, or you are African British, or whatever it may be. No, not marrying my daughter to you because you're black. And however they put that together, that's how it comes out. Am I lying? Okay, so the question is asking, based on what we stated about hasab and compatibility, can that be given as a reason and is sufficient? From a standpoint of Sharia, from the standpoint of law, it's actually a yes-no answer, right? It requires some more detail. Firstly, we have to look to what is best. And the best example is the example of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba. Was this a common stipulation that they made upon themselves? No. We find them intermarrying, even being from different ethnic backgrounds. All of them weren't Arabs. All of them were not Arabs, right? That were there in Medina and in the Arabian Peninsula broadly. No, they weren't. All of them weren't from the Quraysh. Sorry. No. We have some that are from Yemen. We have some that are from Persia. We have some that are coming from Africa. We have different places in the world. And the more that Islam spreads to different parts of the world throughout the time period of the Khulafa al-Rashidun, throughout the time period of the Rashidun caliphs, when the Muslims are pushing into Persia, pushing up into ancient Syria and up into Europe and up into Spain and out into the Africas and out into the known world at the time, what you think happening? They are marrying those people. They're marrying those people. This is why many of the great scholars from that time period, right, from the time of the first and second generation, when you trace their lineage back, their lineage will go back to a specific Sahabi. Look in the books. How is their lineage going back to a Sahabi that's an Arab when this person is Persian, or this person is African, or this person is this or that? Because they married into the people, right? So from the standpoint of it being optimal and what is best, it's best that we take their example. They made that work, so why can't we make that work? Right? Now, after that discussion, is there a consideration for culture and compatibility? Yes. Is there consideration for subculture and again, education and background? Yes. So if the person's actual reason for this is compatibility, then the person can legally hide behind that excuse. Legally can hide behind that excuse. But in front of Allah, Allah knows the hearts of the people. If that makes sense. Questions?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You talk about the two types of fiqh, the two branches of fiqh. The fiqh, the book of ibadah and then the book of social interactions.
Good. The book of worship, book of social interaction.
Is it safe to say that the book of interaction and social interaction would be like broader?
Oh,
And
good.
that's why you said it might be more.
Good question. The question is asking, is it safe to say that Kitabul Mu'amalat, the book of social interaction, that it is longer and broader than the book of worship, and then the book of Kitabul Ibadat, the book of worship? Interestingly, no. Interestingly, no. No. And I think what saves it and I'm just speaking about this from an experiential and practical standpoint. If not for Kitab al-Salah, then I believe the book of social interaction would be longer. But the longest, most detailed book in fiqh, Kitab al-Salah. Kitab al-Salah. It's the one that we have the most laws and details and descriptions of Salah. It's Salah, right? Last question from our brothers and sisters before we close.